Welcome to Jamf Software's webinar, Prospering with iPad in Higher Education. My name is Dave Saltmarsh, Jamf's Educational Evangelist. What I'm hoping to accomplish tonight is something perhaps a little different. We really won't be getting into the technicalities of the capabilities of the Jamf software in the Casper suite. What I'm looking to present is some information we've been gathering. We've been seeing a trend, and when I say we, myself and others, we attend conferences, we go visit schools, and for about the last 2 years, we noticed higher ed institutions starting to have interest in using iPads. Now, for some of us, having used iPads since they were first rolled out in K12 institutions and iOS devices prior to that for students, especially in foreign language classes, we've tried a lot of different things. So we've sort of gone down the road ahead of time. What I'd like to suggest is there are some proven best practices that K12 has kind of learned that higher ed could learn vicariously, which is sort of the opposite of a lot of my experience in schools. When I was looking to introduce things in my K12 environment, mostly back in the mid-2000s, late 2000s, I was doing research on what schools were doing. When I was interested in opening an option for BYOD in my K-12 school in 2007, 2008, I was looking at what higher ed was doing. When I wanted to transform my library into a more modern environment, more welcoming to students, I went out and visited and then researched and looked what those programs were doing, even when I merged my technology and library. Today, I'd like to offer the reverse back. And secondly, why a school-provided, specifically iPad model, could lead to greater use and acceptance. And I'd like to put in that acceptance by teachers, by educators. Greater acceptance, and I will be talking to that specifically on why there's a need for that. Lastly, how can we provide, which is an important aspect, a secure environment for learning and testing or exams with iPads? Because that is certainly a use case. So let me get into a little bit of what we're seeing and that we've seen over the last 5 years or so while iPad's been out there in K-12. Absolutely, we saw people adapt immediately and adopt immediately the concept of the great amount of apps and books that are available. We saw teachers that never used technology before see the great potential it had to change learning, especially in engaging other students that maybe weren't engaged before and giving this user experience that had new affordances. It really had a lot to offer, and we've seen the evolution also of what Apple's provided over the time. We're seeing K-12 adoptions, and certainly in higher ed, of iTunes U. iTunes U certainly providing content is one thing. Universities have certainly been doing that. They were doing it before K-12 was. However, what we're seeing now is on the iPad specifically, it's almost a learning management system and a document round trip system where teachers have screen markup and capabilities such as that isn't in the normal realm of what some people see as iTunes U in the broader scope. Additionally, we'd like to suggest that some people that haven't seen iOS in action lately don't recognize how easy it is to manage when you have a mobile device management system like the Casper suite, and how you can do so many things hands-free or not a lot of labor on the receiving end of the user. So some people perhaps may have looked at iPads and the implementation and thought that it wasn't practical for their environment. And K-12 has basically worked those kinks out, I'd love to say. When we look at why people are doing it, which is certainly in K-12 education when they involve technology, especially the schools that are implementing Apple products and iPads, they're looking to first transform learning. I'd love to say that I think that's starting to happen in higher ed, and I'll speak to a little bit when we get to how it applies to it. But I'd also like to say that they're turning to a more student-centered approach versus a teacher-centered, where the teacher becomes more of an activator of learning, helping guide the discovery and provide resources and point students in the direction they need to discover things. And a statement that used to be in the 80s and 90s, many people heard when mobile learning first came out. Anytime, anywhere. Well, the bigger trend that we're actually being able to facilitate is this any pace. Learners are not all ready to learn the same concept, and they aren't the same when they walk in the door. So being able to provide things that students can access and perhaps rewatch over again, or start a lesson earlier or later rather than where a teacher might have started that lesson or activity. So certainly in K-12 we're seeing those. And the other concept to share out is the use cases. We've certainly, I was in Maine for 10 years when we first started rolling out one-to-one. We certainly expanded that in our middle schools anyways. We expanded that with some iPads. We're seeing a lot of shared use models. In the universities, I'm also seeing where one professor in a science program has their own kit or set in their classroom. We also have the student devices, student-owned devices, and certainly the trend that probably started in the 90s, mid-2000s, early 2000s in higher ed that I noticed was the move to BYOD, to having students bring their own devices. And I will tell you, I'm not saying that isn't a good thing. I'm just going to point out some things that come around with that and how we could make it better when we look at how you might be able to model some of what K-12 is doing on that. I would like to show a couple things that have evolved that K-12 has really been in the forefront of dealing with, that today, if you choose to go down the iPad route with your higher ed institution, whether on a small scale or a one-to-one, what you're going to find out is today, because of the device enrollment program, some of the troubles, the headlines that you saw have been eliminated because of this ability that Apple's created this device enrollment program. And the schools that were early adopters, they struggled with, being able to get devices out and managed. Today, and as a matter of fact, I wrapped up a webinar earlier today where we showed how easy it is to get a device and basically open it out of the box and turn it on and get it to come up with the proper settings and not have any option but to have that happen. So really, the bottlenecks are starting to disappear. We also can very easily, and I will tell you that the recorded webinar for this should be up. We have it for iPad one-to-ones, but shared use iPads are what I did earlier today. We showed the process of how easy it is to connect into the Apple deployment system, a system like the Casper Suite. And the other key thing that device enrollment program gives institutions that maybe were concerned about how much effort it would take by their IT department, that is mostly a Windows-based experience level. We're seeing librarians, and as a former librarian and a teacher, and I do have several degrees, but I have managed some servers in my years, but primarily I'm more of an educator. They're the ones managing the iPads at the lower level of the technical abilities. And to be able to reset a device and power it back up, and I have a video that shows it takes a couple minutes to have it come right back up in a new state with all the correct apps and things like that. That's huge. But the bigger piece that it solved in K-12 was the problem with device reset. Students used to be able to delete the profile, the enrollment profile. And today, we can make that so it can't happen. However, if you wanted a student to leave your institution, we have some K-12s that at graduation, the device becomes theirs. But for the previous several years, the device was managed and they couldn't, it's pretty much a brick if they powered it down. When it powered back up, it has to go into the school system. Well, we just simply remove that from the DEP program and the student can walk away with the device just like they had bought it from the Apple Store. So that's one big improvement that you'd probably want to be aware of if you hadn't been paying attention to iPads. The other is the Apple Volume Purchase Program. Back in the iPod Touch days, trying to get apps on devices was an issue. And even when the Volume Purchase Program came out, maybe less of an issue for higher ed, but in K-12, budgeting is pretty important. And we aren't into giving away things that we can't reuse again. We're used to buying software. We had been doing it for years, taking it back off a computer and putting it onto another computer. Well, now the Apple Volume Purchase Program has evolved so much that you can, in fact, distribute to an individual student, to their Apple ID, an app. And that app can flow from our system to that student. But when the student unenrolls or moves to another course, and let's say you're using a pretty high-powered app that you're able to purchase so many licenses for, seats for, under the volume purchase program, and then at the end of the semester, you're able to retain those, have those come back to the institution to be reused. Maybe not that significant for a higher ed institution, but if you can, if you're looking to perhaps put the funding for students to buy the devices through the institution, if you can save them some money on software, that may go a long way. So retaining that ownership. Of course, we have the evolution of volume purchase program that actually now has device-based volume purchase. So if you have a set, if you have a shared cart that you're using between labs, and you want to assign apps, you need to go back and watch the webinar I just did today on how easy it is onto a device to have apps show up automatically on the app without any interaction by an end user, without any Apple ID. So whether it's one-to-one or whether it's a shared use model, you really have this great ability now to get content, get apps onto them. A little bit more about education. And K12 has been trying for years. How do you get from that high-achieving, early adopting teacher to that highly qualified math teacher but reluctant to using technology? Well, K12 has been studying this and trying to work on this, and they've finally figured out, and quite frankly, the iPad and iOS, the ecosystem Apple has helping to make this transformation. The SAMR model kind of describes the way most teachers start using technology at a substitution level. Think about someone who's only using a computer for word processing. Now, let's move that up to somebody who's making, instead of a presentation, that's just on paper, that they're augmenting that a bit and they're adding some video, they're being creative. They start to really modify and do something higher level, and they're having a multimedia end project for graduation. In high school, I have lots of examples. As of recently, I've started to come up with examples in med school. I have a med school that I just saw a presentation where the end product of these medical students was an ebook that they created. Now, that wasn't totally redefinition, but the idea of doing something you could never have done before, where they were actually out there with students collecting data and then presenting it in a completely different mode, is what we are seeing in K12 and what is potential in higher ed. The other potential for higher ed that maybe some people might think I'm a little crazy for suggesting we should do this, but in K12, and then I'll get off my K12 high horse, we've been trying for years to get away from this lecture model. A teacher presenting with PowerPoint or Keynote is not a teacher integrating technology. They are still lecturing. Can we get, which we're trying to do, and foster teachers to change their practice? We're seeing it happen. If you provide them tools to make them comfortable, you can see this happen. And what we want to see is students working small groups independently, and the professor, the teacher, becoming an activator of learning, someone facilitating what's going on. The dilemma is this is chaotic, and it's fun and crazy, and it's amazing to see learning happen. But a lot of teachers aren't prepared for that, especially if we start asking college professors to change that. So how do we provide them tools so that if they need to get back to this environment, because sometimes I need that environment. I had kids all over my room, but I need them to come back. We need to look at providing teachers tools so they can feel comfortable getting in that environment. So let me go into how do I think some of this applies to higher ed more specifically. Well, transforming learning, that's not a K-12. They don't own that. It's possible that lower years in university or college aren't looking to completely change from the lecture format. Maybe you have 250, even 75 people in a lecture hall. Okay, I understand that. but I've absolutely seen, I was at a medical school conference a month ago where they came together to look at how they could embrace technology to transform the way they were using things in medical school. Just a few weeks later, I saw someone present at a conference how she helped a bunch of med school students, which I mentioned, with a project. This person is now the director of innovation and learning at a California university, helping med school professors change the way they teach and how students are evaluated and how they actually provide products rather than whatever your research paper is. The next thing I want to say is supervised management. Supervised management of devices can give people management control outside of the IT person. We can actually then give a professor in a lecture hall some management capabilities if the device is supervised. Now, this is why should it be institutionally purchased versus a private individual buying it? If the university buys it, you saw how easy DEP can be. Well, you saw an animation. I'd love for you to watch the video of how easy it is. We can get a device supervised as it's coming out of the box and being turned on. So no longer do you need to hook a device up with Apple Configurator to get this to happen. And so you have some great abilities once a device is supervised. For instance, online exams. Well, K12 is definitely leading the way. And while some people think of high-stakes exams as the primary online tool, I'm a practical person who needs to give a quiz on Tuesday in whatever app I want to use. I'm a practical teacher who wants to give a quiz in a learning management system. However, I still need a secure environment. So let's not limit our thoughts to high-stakes exams, possibly other forms of just day-to-day usage in higher ed. This is the piece that I really think needs us to take a good, strong look, and why I'm bringing this to you about what I think iPads can help do. As a parent, as a community member, I've had this concern. I had the concern when my daughter, who's had a laptop since 7th grade, came home from college last year in her junior year and told me how in every single lecture hall, every single class, she is told to put away her MacBook Air. And I didn't understand it at first, and I'd heard a little rumblings, and it's all about the professors being worried about disengagement, and not my daughter. My daughter isn't going to be disengaged in class. She wants to take notes. She wants to keep notes, and she's using different software to create cue cards as the instructor's presenting. But that professor is so concerned of a student across the room just watching YouTube that 55% of instructors ban the use of technology in their classroom. Now, this isn't me suggesting it. We've seen and heard about the trend. EDUCAUSE, which is a U.S. national higher ed organization publication, has done some surveys of students and instructors for the last few years, and it's showing that there is outright banning. Now, perhaps that's by early years at university, but unfortunately, instead of students, and this is the dilemma, my daughter's had, since 7th grade, she has had a computer. There are students that are growing up today that are starting with technology in kindergarten. You will not see the acceptance of teachers not using technology and it being allowed to be used continue. Yeah, sure, most students probably don't complain too much. They let it go. But it's something to really take a step back and say, how can we help? Well, in the universities that we are hearing adopt iPads, we're seeing some interesting use. We're seeing iTunes U actually replace some learning systems, learning management systems. One thing we don't do at Jamf, and I think those that are customers on this webinar would appreciate, we don't talk about who our customers are. We don't say by name. But we have seen over the last 2 years the trend of people moving towards it. So we've gone and visited some of these. We've talked to our customers, our higher ed, that are buying iPads. And they want to be able to use things like iTunes U, but it runs on an iPad. And iBooks. Schoolology learning management system. Nearpod. Nearpod is an application that allows a professor to put their lecture in the face of students on their iPads. At the same time, students can watch lessons, on their own. But one of the key things is that ability to actually know, like you used to do in a lab, where it was on the people's devices. And I want to rest on this last one. Certainly, Poll Everywhere is the icon I'm showing. But how many of your universities are using student response systems or polling systems? Well, my understanding is many universities require them, and some students are actually having to go to the campus bookstore and buy 3 or 4 different handheld clickers because a different professor uses them. So what we've heard as an interest in higher ed is to start using digital versions. All 5 of these apps are fantastic, and when they're being used, they really can help in the learning process. If the students have their iPad, that's great. The dilemma is students come into the classroom and we've embraced BYOD. However, not everything works as well on one device as it does the next. So potentially purchasing iPads, and the concept we're seeing is they're issuing iPads out to all students. So when they come to class, when they show up to the lecture hall, the professor knows at least they have this. So an iPad mini, for instance, is a great add-on device to the repertoire of a student who already has their own primary computer that they use outside of class. One app you haven't seen yet that can help bring all of these together that I want to mention is what we provide. The Casper Suite doesn't charge extra for a classroom teacher app that allows the lecturer to have some management. And I'd like to spend a few minutes explaining why I think this will embrace that reluctant teacher who's hesitant to let technology in their lecture hall. That 55%. Casper Focus actually allows the teacher to manage the iPads that are in their classroom if you bought them through the institution and you supervise them. And then you install the specific apps you want them to be using in the classroom. Maybe it's Blackboard, whatever your learning management system is, whatever your favorite student response system. Because let me give you this example. I'm in a classroom. I'm a teacher, and I want all my students to be on I want to ask them a question. And maybe they were talking amongst themselves. Perhaps I actually allowed them to engage in each other. And then I go, I want to ask a formative assessment. I want to ask a quick question. How long would it take to get 150 students to stop, get out their clicker, respond, versus the teacher actually, from their own iPad, doesn't even say a word to the student. They simply tap the favorite one and it shows up on the student's device. They didn't waste a minute getting kids' attention. The response system shows up. It's basically guided access remotely. The students answer the question. The professor lets them back out. Now, let's back up. Let's talk about the professor who's using Nearpod for having students follow along. So rather than not letting my daughter use her device, he could have everyone have their iPad out and put them into their favorite note app. Or he could have them in Nearpod following along where they could actually take some notes in Nearpod. But he knows that all 80 or 70 or whatever of the students are in Nearpod. And if somebody for reason doesn't have the app, he'll see it on their device. But it's thinking about that, giving teachers that are reluctant to using technology tools to help embrace change. Now, hopefully they start using it less and less. And this is where the next scenario comes in. You want to give a quiz on Wednesday. So why we're suggesting a one-to-many, we think it can support student engagement, increase teacher acceptance, and foster an alternative to lecture. If I have a testing app or a website that I want to switch students to, because Casper Focus can do an app or a website. So if Schoolology.com and you want them to go to that and you want to put them in a specific website, you can. It's just I would probably only do that if I was giving a test or a quiz. And wonderfully, I know they can't leave. They can't go out on the internet. They can't email a buddy. They can't text from their device. They are basically, well, they are guided access to Safari and then web restricted to that one website. The other interesting piece, which I would like to suggest is actually more powerful, is what if that teacher has actually changed their structure and they're letting students talk amongst themselves and work in a group? But then again, we go back to that need to rein them back in, get their attention. Because that's actually what I'm trying to foster, is change your teaching practice, but when you need to get their attention. So smoothing transitions is probably the most powerful thing you get when you have the Casper Suite and then you have Casper Focus that comes with it, is the fact that a professor can be having students work and then on the fly call up the focus piece, which is they could go to an app, they could go to a website, but they're going to go to attention screen. And they can actually type a customized message. Imagine 100 students loud in a lecture hall talking to each other, and all of a sudden, they're working on something on their iPad, and that happens. And it says, stop and please look up. Now, sure, maybe not every single student's going to stop and look up because they weren't looking at their iPad, but it certainly helped that professor get most of the students back. I mentioned I could customize a message. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but at great opportunities when people are working in groups and then you're having them maybe put their notes in one of their favorite apps to record what each of them are saying, and you could send them a little message saying like 5 more minutes and we need to come back as a group. Those are the kind of things that will start getting some professors that maybe were reluctant back into allowing the technology. And hopefully they can start using some of the amazing creativity kind of things like we're seeing in some of the higher level, once students are at a higher level in programs that people are doing. So in essence, it's that opportunity, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It's the same little piece if I continued that video demo. So in essence, Casper Focus that comes with the Casper Suite that lets you manage the devices and deploy apps also gives you the ability to conduct secure exams on the fly, improve those transitions, and gain time. That's most teachers say, save me time and I'll try something. If we can actually show them I can save them time, they're pretty darn happy. And the one thing our customers, for some reason, our customers that own iOS don't even, IT for some reason hasn't even told them. Casper Focus is free. It comes with the product. I have webinars on Casper Focus specifically. I have 9 short 1 to 2 minute little how-to videos on all of the functions if you're curious. I'd also suggest that you go look at our Jamf Nation. We have universities that are out there. Go onto our Jamf Nation. You don't have to be a customer. Ask them. I think you'll see they're trying to change learning, trying to provide equity to students. Regardless of what other device they have, they know that they can provide a really great ecosystem and environment for learning. Also, you're going to see some white papers on this topic posted on our website with this video. We certainly have other white papers on formative and summative assessment, how to conduct exams. I have a webinar on conducting exams with iPads, not using Casper Focus and using Casper Focus. But at the same time, we have other white papers that could be of interest related to this topic. Thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate your attention.